We've all received that mandate from the Savior Jesus Christ that we need to see others the way that Jesus Christ would see them. However, for many of us, it's so difficult at times. How can we best ensure that we're following Christ's example and doing what's right? Well, in today's episode, I'm going to tackle that topic with a good friend of mine, one individual that's definitely helped me with this over the years. You're going to love this episode. Hey everyone, welcome to Changing. My name is Donald Kelly and I'm your host, and I'm excited to be here with you today. I'm bringing on a good friend of mine, Mr. John Diaz, and I have all his information down in the show notes. Jonathan and I grew up actually here in South Florida, going to church in the South Florida area, and got a chance to know him and got a chance to be to learn from him during college, where we were roommates, and I'm sure he'll tell you that story, how I swindled him into doing that. But you'll find out more about that. But John is a pretty awesome individual. Right now, he is a teacher, and he inspires students and very strong on motivation. And he's going to tell you a little bit more about him. As we dive into this episode today, we're going to have a discussion just frankly around this topic. How do we see others the way that Jesus Christ would have us do? If this is your first time watching one of our videos or listening to the podcast, subscribe. If you've been listening for a while, I ask you to take this link and share it with one other person to help them to improve their relationship with Jesus Christ and to change and draw closer to him. Make sure to listen, take some notes, and see how this can help you. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Man, I'm looking forward to this, man. John, I bragged about you a little bit there in a teaser. I want you to take a second and give us a little bit introduction. Tell us a little bit more about what you do, man.
So first of all, anything that Donald told you is a lie. No, just kidding. I don't know if Donald told you this, but me and him grew up in the same stake in Florida, and we would see each other occasionally at dances. And then right before I was going to college at BYU, Idaho, where some meeting somewhere, I can't remember where exactly, maybe it was like a priesthood meeting for the stake. And Donald came up to me and said, "Hey, where are you going to college?" And I said, "BYU, Idaho." He's like, "Oh, great, me too." And he says, "How you getting there?" I said, "I don't know. I was thinking about driving." He's like, "Really? Can I bum a ride with you?" I'm like, "All right, sounds good. I can use the company." So we drove up together. And then he says, "Do you have a place to stay at?" I'm like, I haven't really figured it out yet. He's like, "You know what? There's a great apartment I got for you." Sure enough, it was his apartment. We ended up rooming together, and the rest is history. So that's how I got to know you. A little bit about me. So I've been working in education for a while. I worked for a couple universities, and then recently transitioned to working at the high school. And so currently I work at a local high school here in Utah. And I teach psychology classes. It's been fun. Been doing it now for this is my fourth year, and it's been a great experience for me.
See, and told you John was cool. Imagine being in this class. You'd have a whole bunch of fun there. We got a chance to connect with a couple of the students, and they sing his praises. John, one thing that you did in college that was really good is, every so often we'll talk and whatnot. But you always go back to I think it was because you studied psychology, and just because you're John Diaz, you're cool in a sense, where you tend to see, at least I'm seeing this from my perspective, you tend to see the good in people a lot. When we first became roommates, you're always like, pointing out good stuff and saying, stuff about people. And even when it was like, I'm being a grubby, greedy businessman trying to do my business idea, you understood from a psychology standpoint, and you saw people in a different way. But let's just have a frank conversation about that, because I can't necessarily, I don't feel like I can do this with a lot of people, just to talk to you about this. Do you find yourself in that situation though, where you sometimes may not see someone the way that Christ would have you, and how do you go about doing that? And am I just being too hard on myself? Because my wife and I had a conversation around this weekend.
So that's an interesting question, right? So the question is, how do we see people as Christ would see them, right?
Yeah.
And I think as human beings, a lot of the times we put ourselves in the box. We put ourselves in this like belief that like, I think of the idea of heroes and villains. And I think sometimes it's easier to make ourselves heroes and everyone else villains, right? And so if someone doesn't do something the way we like it done, they're the villains and I'm the hero and I'm the one that's right. And I think part of it is to protect ourselves, our own pride, our own ego. And so whenever that happens, we tend to see other people as just kind of getting in the way of whatever we want to get done, right? But when we see human beings as Christ would see them, I think it changes the narrative and the perception that we have around them. And it allows us to see people as they truly are, which is what God intends for them to be. So, as an example, for me as a high school teacher, a lot of the times we call it end of the year emails, right? So we'll get emails from students saying, "Hey, I can't turn. I'm sorry, I haven't shown up to class. Sorry, I haven't been there. Can I turn something in late?" And the belief a lot of times for teachers is like, "Oh, I'm getting email after email after email about this. Why should I help people? Like, no, here's what I said. You should do. You didn't do it. Now you're asking for help, and no, right?" And sometimes there can be even that belief that we as teachers can have of, oh, who's this lazy kid, right, coming into me last minute, right? But when we look at them as human beings, what's interesting is we take a second to just pause and hear their situations and what's going on. In psychology, there's a term called situational attribution versus dispositional attribution. Dispositional attribution is the tendency that we as human beings tend to have as we, I use the word lazy, right? We turn to blame people's dispositions for what they do. But situational attribution looks at like, what's the situation around what behavior is occurring. And so when we tend to have that, we tend to be more empathetic and we tend to see things more as Christ would. And so a situational attribution example for that could be, well, maybe that student's really been dealing with a lot of stuff at home. I had one student that would regularly show up late. And one day I asked her, "Hey, how come you're always kind of late?" And she said, "Oh, I have to drop off my siblings and take them to their school." And so for her family situation, her parents weren't doing so great financially. They had to work. Her, as a high school student, was in charge of getting her younger siblings ready for school every single day, making sure that they were, eating and getting dressed and brushing their teeth and all that, and then dropping them off. And so
Wow.
when I think about that, right, for me, I can barely get myself ready each morning, right? But here's this high school student doing that for her younger siblings. And so then who am I to judge this person for showing up late to my class when they're going above and beyond their situations, causing them to do so much more? And so I think that's where the beginning of empathy and seeing them as Christ would starts, is we have to understand where people come from and the situations that encompass them.
It's an interesting point, and you introduced that concept to me too with Covey: seek first to understand, then to be understood. The fifth law,
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I
fifth habit.
remember us talking about that. Yeah. I'd go into my psychology class and I'd tell you about some of the things I learned. I remember us talking about that. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. What were you thinking with that?
Going back to this whole notion of looking at the student in that vein, it kind of it kind of helps you to realize that everybody has something like that, and everybody has some kind of situation that could cause a problem. But let's say somebody is deliberately, go back to the students. There is a student though that is that slacker, like totally just not doing it. And they know they can, get away with it and they can come in at the last minute. How do you see when somebody is deliberately doing something wrong? How do you see them? How can we see them as Christ would, or to have that belief?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it can be really tempting to see negative behaviors of people and think, oh, this is the worst ever, right?
Mm.
But the reality is, we all form our own narratives, and some narratives go a lot deeper than what we think. So my thought goes to that student that might not be doing a lot. We have some students that have never show up the entire school year and they'll show up the last week. And, here's the example I can think of. Sorry. I remember there was a class that I was teaching once, and I had a student that was very disruptive in this class. He
Yeah.
would regularly have outbursts, and he'd be kind of goofy. He'd kind of pick on someone else in my class, which doesn't happen too often, right? But he was kind of this goofy kid, and he wanted to be the class clown. And we'd try to ask him to settle down, and he would not, right? And he just had a lot of energy. And as teachers, we have coaches come in and observe us. And there was a coach that came into my class, and she observed that behavior, and she said, "I wonder how much or the lack thereof of attention he's getting at home."
Mm.
And when she said that, I thought about that a little bit more, and I said, okay, well, let me talk to the student. So I pulled him aside on a different day when he was kind of, at his worst, right? And I asked him to step outside with me. And he talked to me for a little bit. And I said, "Hey, are you okay?" And it kind of took him aback a little bit because he was thinking he was in trouble, right?
Yeah.
And I just asked him, "Are you okay?" And he says, "Mr. Diaz, I just feel like nobody gives up." And he uses a few choice words. Nobody gives a crap about me. And he says, I go home and I have my stepdad at home and he doesn't talk to me and no one really talks to me. He's like, the only reason I'm here is because of my mom. And then he goes off and talks about his mom. He says, my mom is the only person I care about, but nobody else really cares about me. And, I let him know, hey, listen, I care about you, right? But after that conversation, what was interesting was that he felt like someone actually cared about him and he felt like he was valued. And since that instance happened, his behavior in my class changed. He would be the person that when other students were acting up, he'd be like, "Hey, everybody, shut up! Mr. Diaz is talking," right? And he became an ally in that sense. But it took really just that sincere care. And so when you see human beings where they come from, Christ knows all of us, and He knows all of our circumstances. He knows us. You know what I'm saying? He knows me individually, John Diaz. And he knows that John Diaz is a very faulty person. He's got a lot of struggles, right? And John Diaz is still trying to do his best. And if Christ can understand me, then why can't I seek to understand other people and where they
I love this. Some of the points that I'm getting from that, John, and that's an awesome story, by the way. And I definitely commend you for that.
think
You see, you have way more patience. Just that's what I told y'all that John was going to be cool for this episode. This the ideas that I'm getting here, the action steps are: one, understand where somebody's coming from, which requires me to, well, first stop my quick judgment. Two, understand where they're coming from. The only way I'm going to understand Christ can understand where you're coming from because he can read through us, right? He knows the end from the beginning. I need to talk to someone to be able to get that insights. And I can tell you, like, sometimes I fall in that prideful state where it's like, shoot, forget that. I want to talk to them. Villain. Again, it's like, no, villain, you're
Yeah,
bad. You're
yeah,
not fulfilling my narrative
yeah,
of who you're supposed to be. So therefore it's bad, but it's being willing to get past the pride to say no. I've had those situations and I'm probably looked at as a villain by other people. Let me just go and at least talk to them. And once you can talk to them, then you can understand. And then that narrative, once you can understand where they're coming from and you have that conversation, it changes. In this kid's case, I bet you the way that it's always been treated, you kick him out of class, put him into detention, or you write him up, send him to principal office, and it validates the conversation again. Teachers are jerks. Nobody cares about me. You know what I mean? But it's just like a simple little practice.
yeah. I agree. I think a lot of it, also comes down to seeing the best in people, right? I think a lot of times we tend to think of things that from a deficiency standpoint. So we see where we're used to in business and sports, you always look at what are you doing wrong? What are you doing wrong? Fix it, right? And so us as human beings, I think sometimes we look at others and we look at what are they doing wrong? How can we fix it? Or whatever they're doing wrong bugs us, right? And there's a story. I saw this. It wasn't me. It was a teacher that did the multiplication tables, and they put 9 times 1, 9, 9 times 2, 17, 9 times 3, 27. They went down the line, right? And everybody's kind of laughing, and they noticed, well, 9 times 2 is not 17, right? And so they raised their hands and they, called out the teacher and said, well, you got that one wrong. And then the teacher told them, well, I wanted to teach you a lesson. In life, look at how many I got right. I got 9 out of 10 right on this multiplication chart, but y'all notice the one that I do wrong. And so as human beings, we tend to focus on what people do wrong in general, right? Like we focus on the negative. And Christ looks at our potential. He doesn't even look at us at where we're at, but where we can be. And he looks at when we see that potential in human beings and in each other, we're then able to have a different perspective where we can respond more responsibly towards where people are actually at in life. The other example I think of is, Donald. I don't know if you told the story here, but for those of you that don't know, Donald used to be the best server this side of the Mississippi when he went to college in Idaho, right? But you think of like the service industry, right? Jobs
Sure.
in service industry, right? As a server, I imagine, I mean, as good as you were, Donald, you probably got an order wrong every once in a while, right? And for individuals, for people, right? it's always, for some reason, for whatever reason, we tend to get centered on like ourselves, and we get super angry and upset whenever things aren't going perfectly, and we blame people. And we get very upset and very irate, and we see, oh, what's this thing, that I didn't get my wings on time, right? Um, but we don't really understand the story of that person, seeing people as human beings. And so for you, you're a college student at the time, right? That was trying to make ends meet. You're hustling, you're working as much as you can, you're having to pay for college on your own. Knowing your story, you came from a single parent home where your mom, she sacrificed everything for you and did so much for you. Um, and for as much as she wanted to do, I know from your story and what you told me that she wasn't able to pay for college for you, right? Like other parents can, right? And so here you are, someone as a server that is hustling and trying to do everything you can to provide a better future for yourself and your future family. And yet someone just looks at, oh, they got my order wrong. And they don't really see you as a human being. They don't really see you as who you really are. And I think that's the challenge that we have as human beings, is to try to do that with others a little bit more.
Man, making me like question a whole bunch of stuff now, man. Like, looking back at my behavior in so many different instances. If you were to bottle this all down, John, I pull some stuff here. What would you say? Give me some action steps that I can do to be a better disciple of Jesus Christ, to change my ways and to make sure that I'm seeing others as Christ would.
Good question. So I know this is the cliche has become a cliche of, the basics, right? For me, what I've found in my life is that when I am in a good place spiritually, when I do my morning scripture study and my prayers and I have a good relationship with God, my mind tends to be better when I can be in a better space to be able to react to people in a better way. And so that would be the first thing. I know that sounds very basic, and it's the cliche of all cliches that we say in church, right? But the other thing that I would say is, I think, again, back to the hero villain analogy, a lot of times we tend to think that we're right. Whatever we're doing, we're right. I mean, because we see our perspective really well. But the challenge is that we don't see other people's perspective as clearly when we're so focused on ourselves. And so I think the part of the challenge is to try to see things from other people's point of views, right? And to take ourselves out of things a little bit better. There's a really good book. It's called Leadership and Self-Deception. And it talks about this idea that we tend to put ourselves in this box where, we see things from our own point of view, and we lie to ourselves, because we want to make ourselves feel better. But at the end of the day, we just need to see others as human beings, as people, right? Not as objects, but as people that, are trying to do their best. And when we have that perspective, that's, I think, what allows us to be more like what Christ would want us to do.
Love it, man. Well, I appreciate these ideas, John. I appreciate these feedback. If there are folks out there who are trying to become better, want to have a conversation with you and to pick your brain a little bit more, what's the best way for them to be able to connect with you?
If they're trying to be better, they probably shouldn't talk to me too much. Should probably just reach out to you. But, sorry, can I say this? Sorry, I know this is a little bit off topic here, but I learned this. Someone said this at my ward the other day. They said, one thing that I wish I would have done a lot more is, in church, we tend to turn to other people. We tend to look for other avenues for us. And the source is our Father in heaven, right? That's the source. And so if we ever want to be better, that's the real source. And so I want to give credit there. But if anybody wants to have here's some gossip or some stories of Donald Kelly, you're welcome to hit me up. My email is jondiazsj@gmail.com. I'm sure you'll put that on the notes there, but jondiazsj@gmail.com.
Man, John, I appreciate you. Thank you so much, and keep changing lives and keep shaping individuals.
Thank you for what you're doing over here. You're doing good stuff over here.
Hey, appreciate it. It's fun stuff. Hey, that was John Diaz. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode today. I'm telling you, this stuff was great, and I tell you, he's an awesome individual, and I recommend you go and connect with him. If you go ahead and get some stories, make sure they're juicy ones first before you go ahead and start spreading it. But make sure you look at me as the way Jesus would and listen to this episode. Thank you so much for being here. If you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe to this podcast. Also, share this with one other person that can benefit from it. When it's all said and done, our goal here is to make sure that we can prepare ourselves when Christ comes, that we can be on the right-hand side with him. I know he lives. I know Jesus is the Christ. And I know the atonement is real. I know he has restored his church. And I know that he has given us prophets and apostles to help guide us today. I testify of these things and share that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.